StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories, where biblical stories of the ages come alive.
Very early on the morning of the third day, our Sunday, the women started to the tomb with their spices for the body of Jesus. They didn't know that soldiers were keeping watch at the tomb, and they didn't know that the tomb was sealed. As they walked along, they wondered how they were going to roll away the heavy stone that blocked the door into the tomb. Continuing with our series on the life of Christ, this story from the Bible is titled The Resurrection of Jesus.
StudyJesus.com presents Bible Stories with your host, Dr. Joe Jackson. Stories directly from God's holy word, told in easy-to-understand story form that the whole family will enjoy, and featuring the work of a talented artist illustrating each week's story. Now gather the family because it's time for this week's Bible story.
They were greatly surprised when they reached the tomb, and they found that the big stone had already been rolled away and that the tomb was empty. One of the women, named Mary Magdalene, ran back to tell Peter and John about it, and she said, "They've taken away our Lord, and we don't know where they've laid him." The other two women had gone into the tomb, and as they stood there wondering what this meant, two men stood by them in shining garments and said, "Why do you look for the living in the home of the dead? Your Lord's not here. He's risen. Do you not remember what he said to you in Galilee, that the Son of Man would be given up to wicked people and be crucified, and on the third day would rise again? Go now and tell the disciples that their master will meet them in Galilee." These two women did remember these words of Jesus, and now they understood what he had meant by them. They quickly went away to tell the others the message which had been given to them. As soon as Peter and John heard the story of Mary Magdalene, they ran to the tomb. John could run faster than Peter, and he got there first. But he didn't go into the tomb immediately, but as he stooped down and looked in, he saw the clothes that had been wrapped around Jesus. When Peter arrived, he went into the tomb, and John soon followed him. And then they saw for themselves that what Mary had told them was true, that the clothes were there, but the body of Jesus was not. It was nowhere to be seen. Peter and John returned home, but Mary Magdalene, who had followed them back to the tomb, stayed there. She didn't leave. As she stooped down to look into the tomb, she saw two angels sitting there, one at the head and the other at the feet of where the body of Jesus had lain. The angels asked, "Woman, why do you weep?" And Mary answered, "Because they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him." She turned around and she saw someone else standing behind her, who also asked, "Woman, why do you weep? For whom are you looking?" Mary's eyes were filled with tears, and thinking that she was talking to the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away from here, please tell me where you've laid him, and I'll take him away." And the voice spoke again, "Mary." Only one person in the world had ever spoken her name as sweetly as that. Looking up, she saw Jesus, and she cried out, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not cling to me, for I've not yet gone to heaven to live. But I shall go to be with my Father and your Father, with my God and your God. Go now to my brethren and tell them what I've said." The other women were still on the way to tell the disciples the angel's message when Jesus met them, and he said, "Rejoice." Trembling, they fell down at Jesus' feet and worshiped him. Seeing that they were afraid, Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they'll see me." What about the soldiers who were ordered to keep guard over the tomb where Jesus was laid? As they were watching, they heard a noise, and they saw a strange sight. An angel whose face was like lightning and whose garments were as white as snow came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. The guards were afraid, and they ran to tell the Sanhedrin what had happened. The Sanhedrin were quite alarmed, and they called another meeting in great haste to decide what they should do about it, and here's what they decided. They gave the soldiers some money and asked them to tell this lie that when they were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. The soldiers were not willing to say this, for if Pilate, the governor, had heard that they'd slept while they were on duty, they might lose their own lives. But the rulers of the children of Israel said, "You needn't be afraid. We'll make it right with the governor." So the soldiers took the money, and they did as they were told, and even today, many of the children of Israel still believe that the soldiers told the truth. Mary Magdalene went to the disciples, who were very lonely and very sad, and told them that Jesus was alive and that she'd seen him. And the disciples didn't believe her, and they also didn't believe the other women who came with the same story. That same day, as two of the disciples were walking toward the village of Emmaus, about 8 miles from Jerusalem, talking of all those things that had happened, a stranger came up and joined them and asked them what they were saying. That made them look so sad. And they told this stranger how Jesus, who they thought was to be the King of Israel, had been crucified by the rulers of the children of Israel. They spoke of the wonderful news that the women had brought to them, that Jesus was alive again. But they showed that they didn't really understand what had happened. And the stranger said to them, "How hard it is for you to understand all that the prophets said about your king." And then the stranger showed them that what the prophets had said about the king had all come true in the life of Jesus. The stranger talked to them all the way to Emmaus, and they were so delighted to hear him that they asked him not to go farther that night, but to stay there with them. And the stranger accepted their invitation and went into the house. As he sat at supper with them, he took bread and blessed it and then broke it. And as he did so, they looked more carefully at him than they had before, and they knew that he really was not a stranger. They saw that the face was that of one they knew and loved, and that it was Jesus, their Lord. But as soon as they found this out, his place at the table was empty. He had suddenly left them. The two men hurried back to Jerusalem to tell the apostles about it. Their hearts were filled with joy as they told their friends that Jesus had walked with them and had taught them how the sayings of the prophets had come true in his life and death, but that they had not known him until he sat at the table with them and broke the bread. The apostle says, "We know that he's living because Peter has seen him." And just then, someone came into the room, and they all looked up at once because they heard a voice say, Peace be unto you. As they looked, they were afraid. What was it that they saw? Could it be Jesus, their master, or was it a spirit? Well, a spirit couldn't talk, but they heard a voice, and the voice said, "Why are you afraid? Why do you wonder who's with you? Look at my hands and look at my feet. Do you not know whose they are? Take hold of them and make sure. A spirit has not flesh and bones as you see me have." They were so happy that they couldn't believe that Jesus, their master, was really with them until he said, "Have you anything to eat?" Lord willing, in our next Bible story, we'll learn that the apostles gave Jesus broiled fish and honeycomb to eat. And we'll conclude this story titled, The Resurrection of Jesus.
Precious memories, unseen angels, sent from somewhere to my soul.